Hello, and we're back again, day 15 with the 30 Days to Photoshop Mastery. We're almost halfway there. Almost. After today's lesson, you are halfway through the 30 Days of Photoshop Mastery. And that's awesome. Really the exciting thing about this for me, for you, is that we're only scratching the surface of things. I think even for me, I only use about maybe 60% of the power of Photoshop. So it just gives you a lot of things to look forward to. It's never ending. It's like sticking your hand in the never-ending purse. My wife has about 3 of those. So yesterday we talked about clipping masks and the thief of the layer that becomes a thief of the layers underneath. Okay. Today we're going to talk about selection tools and how to make a selection. And if you'll look here, I've got 2 different images for today's lesson. We've got selections and masks PSD file here that's got some shapes on it. And here we have a practical application image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about selections, why they're important, and why you're going to use them in your workflow, and many different ways that you can make these selections. So over here are your selection tools. A selection is going to look like a series of racing ants, okay? So the tool that I'm going to select right here is called the Marquee Tool. Okay, the Marquee Tool, really just basic. We click and hold, and then we drag, and it makes a selection. So there, we can make a selection for this rectangle or square, as it would be. If we were to press and hold Shift, it will maintain the aspect ratio of the object that we're trying, or of the selection we're trying to make, and then we can make a more close selection for this square. After we've made that selection, we can move that selection up and down by pressing the left, right, up, down arrow keys so that we can make that match perfectly. So that's how we would make a selection for just that square right there. Okay. Now that's with the Marquee Tool. There's many other tools that we're going to show here. What I'm going to do here though is, why would I use this? Well, let's say I wanted to make a selection for this. I'd probably press Control and Spacebar and zoom in here a little bit so I can see this a little bit closer. Then I can press the Spacebar key just by itself, move my canvas around, and then I can get really close to my image by zooming in. And then I'll click and hold and drag that down, press and hold Shift, so I maintain the aspect ratio of a square. And then from there, if I make an adjustment, so let's say I want to make a curves adjustment layer, or let's say a solid color to change the color of this square back here. If I press the solid color adjustment layer, what you'll notice is when it makes that adjustment layer, what else does it do? It makes a mask with it. So now that color change that I'm going to do is going to be more of like this bright magenta color change. Now I didn't make it exact. If you look there, it's not quite exact, and that's okay. So if I click off of this little link here and then click on this mask, I can press the V key to move this and press the down, left and right, and up and down arrow keys to make that smaller and larger after I've made that selection, and we're good to go. And that's basically just a way to show you that, once you've made that selection of that mask, you're not locked into it. Let's look at another selection tool real quick. Here's the Elliptical Marquee Tool. With the Elliptical Marquee Tool, I'm going to draw a circle on here. Okay, so I'm going to try and make this exact circle. So I'm going to click and hold and drag this out and try to make that circle. Press and hold Shift and try to make that circle. It's probably not going to be exact, and I'm not going to be right on. But once I've got that Marquee Tool selected, you'll notice that once I move into this selection, look at that. It becomes like an arrow with a selection around it. So I grab that, I can move this in now, and look at that. I almost made a perfect circle. Man, I almost made a perfect circle. Okay, didn't quite make it perfect to this circle, but it's so close. And from there, I could use that and make a mask so I have a selection for that circle. Let's say again, I want to change the color of it so I can see how close I am here. We'll do a solid color, change this to magenta, and I'm pretty darn close. Man, I was off by like 2 pixels. Not that big of a deal at all, okay? I'm showing you this in kind of a fun way because I want you to try to do this as well. I want you to try and make that square selection and then do a solid color fill with magenta to see if you did a good job with it. Move it around if you need to. You can move that selection around if you need to. But these selections are going to become important when we start to get into the actual practical application phase and how you're going to be using these selections. So bear with me. There's a reason why I'm doing this, okay? There's other selections in here like the single row and the single column marquee. I never really use those because I don't see a place for them in my workflow. Right here, you're going to see a lasso tool, a polygonal lasso tool, and a magnetic lasso tool. And here's where things become a little bit easier for making more precise selections. These were circles and squares. probably not going to use that much in your photography. But with this lasso tool, this is a free-formed tool. So you can try this. I don't think I could do it. I don't have that steady of a hand. But when you click and you move over, it's going to follow exactly as you made your line. And this is going to be kind of funny because, okay. And then if you let go, anywhere you let go, it's automatically going to connect it. And that's important to know. So if you click and drag like this, and then you drop down to here and then let go, it's automatically going to select that. Which, that kind of sucks because you're like, oh man, I needed to make more of a selection. I don't want to have to go back over all this. That's fine. If you press and hold Shift, it will add to that selection as you move around. Okay. And then I'll come up here so it makes that connection up here. Okay. And then let's just do this for funny stuff here. Let's do solid color fill, magenta. Yeah, it was horribly drawn. So it's not that easy. This is the free-form lasso tool. Now, this lasso tool does become important, though, in your workflow when you want to make a kind of a selection of things, because once you've made that selection, you can actually feather the edges of that selection as well. So let's see here. Let me go ahead and just try to make this rectangle. I'm doing a lot better now. I'm flying. I'm moving faster. Okay, and then I'll just click and release so it goes back up and snaps up there. Up here under Select, right here, there's something called Modify. We can expand how big we want this selection to be. We can smooth it out, and we can feather it. So if we press Smooth, it's going to try to smooth our selection by, let's say, 2 pixels. And see if it makes a better selection. Smoothed out, didn't really do that much of a difference. If we go to Select, we go to Modify, and we go to Feather, though, we can feather this out by, let's say, 25 pixels, okay? What that's going to do is it's going to, instead of making it a hard edge selection, it now has a 25 pixel feather that'll transition out. So now, as I go down here and I make that solid color fill, and we change that to magenta, you can see that it's got this feathered edge around it instead of being a hard edge. Feathered edges are really important in your workflow in Photoshop, especially with photography purposes, okay? So keep that in mind, that's the secret to getting a feathered edge on any selection. The next one here is the polygonal lasso tool. And what this does is it allows you to draw perfectly straight lines. So we're going to click in this corner, just one click, and then we'll go over to this corner. If we press and hold Shift, it will maintain a straight line. And then we can go down to this corner, press and hold Shift, it'll maintain a straight line. Press and hold Shift, maintain straight line. Press and hold Shift to maintain the straight line, and that would be a selection that we could do with the polygonal lasso tool. So that can be really helpful with things like this, where you want to go from here to here. We're going to press and hold Shift. We're going to go here because we don't want to hold Shift because that's going to give us a straight line, and we can kind of make a selection of this. And you see where I'm getting at here. We just go from point to point to point to point, so we can make that selection. And the selection isn't complete until I either stop my selection, or if I get to here and I double click, I double clicked and it stopped my selection. So if I wanted to make the rest of this, press and hold Shift, click right here, click to here, here, to here, here. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. There we go. Okay. So that's how you use the polygonal lasso tool. Now, there's another lasso tool in here called the magnetic lasso tool. And this one used to be like the best tool here. I'm going to tell you that these tools you're going to use a lot less now. I'm showing you these because I had to learn from these tools, okay? This is the magnetic lasso. And how this works is it's going to look for pixels. If you click here, it's going to look for pixels. And then once you click, it's going to basically anchor it there. So you can kind of go around here, and if you go really fast, it does a pretty good job of doing it on its own. You just go around this edge here, and it finds pixels, the difference between the pixels in this shape and the pixels that are around it, and it does a pretty good job. But if it jumps like that, then we got a problem. So if it jumps like that, we're like, how do we fix that? Well, we don't want to have to go back and do this whole thing again. So if I press Alt or Option, it will subtract. So I'll click here, 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 and then come up here and double click, it subtracts that. Alt or Option, click right here, go to there, and then come out here, and then double click, and it subtracts it. So here, I noticed that it jumped on the inside of this. So I'd click right here, I'd press and hold Shift, click right here, to here, to here, to here, and then double click, okay? Again, it missed this part. Press and hold Shift, click here, 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 here. All right, and if I want to get out of this, I'll press Control and Space Bar, right click, and fit on screen. Okay? Command or Control and Space Bar. So now I've got a selection for that with the magnetic lasso tool. I'm showing you this rather quickly because you're probably not going to use those tools. Sometimes I use them, but not nearly as much as I use these two tools, which is the magic wand tool and the quick selection tool. So let's first start with the magic wand tool, because it's, again, one of those tools that you're probably not going to use as much as the other one. With the magic wand tool, we set the tolerance here to how many pixels we want it to see outside of it. Now, these shapes are pretty easy to select. So if we select something like 30 pixels around it, that'll be okay. We'll press and click, and it magically makes a selection for that square. So you're probably thinking, like, Blake, 10 minutes ago, you should have showed me this so I wasn't using that square. No. You have to learn all of these tools because you may need these tools, okay? So I'm not letting you go that easy. Once we click off of that, we can click on this one. We made a selection for this, made a selection for this, made a selection for this. Pretty cool, huh? The magic wand tool is actually pretty powerful. In the past, it was the most powerful selection tool out of all of them. But now there's a distant cousin to that. If you've made a selection here like this and you want it to go away, press Command or Control D. And that is the hotkey for deselect. You can come up here to select, and then here there's a deselect here as well. Here is another tool though. This is the quick selection tool. Now the quick selection tool, probably one of my favorite tools now, and probably the only selection tool that I really use anymore. And the quick selection tool is smart because it goes based on your brush size. So if your brush is really big and you click somewhere, it's going to make a selection for basically the whole document. You see it's going all around the entire document. So I'm going to press Command or Control D to get rid of that. Make my brush smaller, much smaller. Make it fit inside here. And now when I click, this is a smart selection. It finds pixels that are very similar to the pixels around it, and it makes a selection. So if we click on this one, it's going to be the same thing. The difference between this one, though, is that as I click on other things, it's automatically going to add those to it. So now I've basically made a selection for this, this, and this, and they're all being added to it. If I were to make a solid color adjustment layer, I can now change all of these shapes to a different color based on this mask right here. Again, it's just a mask. So if I were to press and hold Shift and click on that, it'll get rid of that mask. But we've made a mask from a selection. Typically what you're going to be doing when you're editing photos in Photoshop is you're going to be making selections that will then be turned into masks. So let's go ahead and delete this. I'm going to show you something else here. I'm going to click on this shape, then click on this shape, then click on this shape, then click on this shape. What if I wanted the inverse? Well, we can invert this layer if we go to Select and go to Inverse. But you'll see here there's a short key or a hotkey called Shift Control I. So if I press Inverse, it's going to select everything except for what I just selected. I'm going to press Control or Command Shift and I, and that'll invert that. Now, if we were to make that solid color fill, it's going to fill everything on the outside of those shapes and give us the mask on top of that. So anytime you make a selection and then make an adjustment layer, it's automatically going to add that selection to the adjustment layer. Really speeds up your workflow. Now you're probably thinking, Blake, let's get to some practical application. And I'm agreeing with you because there's only so much of this that I can do. But for your homework and for your practice, I do want you to practice with every one of those selection tools that you see up here. Now, we had our workspace set up to the photography workspace. And in the photography workspace, they're going to have those selection tools there. So make sure you experiment with them, okay? If you don't have those selection tools there, remember you can always right click in your toolbar right here and go Edit Toolbar, and you can add them to it. Edit Toolbar, and if you don't have these tools in here, you can add them to them. Like right now, I can say, you know what? I never use these. I'm going to delete these. Okay, and now I'll press Done. If I wanted to add those back, I just move this over, and that's how you do that. That's way back in like lesson 5. I don't know. We talked about that a long time ago. One of the newest selection tools to hit Photoshop 2022, which if you're looking at my Photoshop now, it looks slightly different because I'm interjecting this in the middle of this video so you can get the update on what happened with this new selection tool. There is an object selection tool. Now, I've got the object selection tool tucked in with my quick selection and magic wand tools. If yours is not there, just go ahead and right click in the toolbar and then say Edit Toolbar. And then you may find this tool over here somewhere. I'll go ahead and move mine out of there and just bring it over here. So you may find this object selection tool somewhere over in the extra tools. You can just move that in. I like to put it right in there with my other quick selection tools. So what's this object selection tool all about? Well, it's actually pretty neat. Up here along the top, you're going to see this button here called Object Finder. We'll talk about that in a second. What object selection can do is you can drag over an object and it will automatically make a selection for that object. We can drag over this crazy looking polygonal figure here and it makes a selection for it. Now the Object Finder tool is really interesting because the Object Finder tool will show you just by hovering over what areas in your image might be a selection that Photoshop recognizes to make it an auto selection. So all you have to do at that point is then click it and it makes the selection. Press and hold Shift and you can make multiple selections from what's available within here. Now this is not always going to find every single thing in your image. Notice how I'm hovering over this polygonal shape here and it's not doing anything, nor is it doing anything on this triangle. It's not recognizing these as objects that it can find. I'm not entirely sure why, but you will find that this tool is probably going to get better as time progresses with future versions of Photoshop because they're putting a lot of time and energy into the way they make selections. Now, to know exactly what is selectable in your image, you can click this button here. And that'll show you with an overlay, a blue overlay, what is selectable in the image. If you'd like to change that, which I typically do, I'm going to change that to the color magenta. Now it shows us with the color magenta where we might have areas in our image that are selectable. I'm also going to increase the opacity up to 100% because that's typically how I like to see things because it makes it a lot easier. Now with that object selection tool, similar to what you're going to see by clicking this button here, if we go up to layer, we now have an option here that says mask all objects. If we click that, it's going to take whatever it could find here within this object finder, and it's going to turn them into their own individual folders with that mask on there, or that selection on there with a mask already created from it. Now going along here, you do have some other options here. Always show overlays, never show overlays. If you don't like this, you can turn it on, you can turn it off, or you can also make this a lasso selection instead of a rectangular selection. With the lasso selection, you'll just draw around the object you want to select, and it will do its best to make a selection for the lasso selection that you made. So now we're going to do some practical application. So I've got a picture here of Yosemite Fall, beautiful Yosemite Fall, just as the winter was fading away with the snow. What I'm going to do here is, this is where selections become important. Okay, I'm going to make a selection for the background and separate that from the foreground so that I can modify each one of them individually. Okay, so this is how I'm going to do that. I'm going to use this tool here, which is the quick selection tool. I'm going to make this brush really small. Like this small, okay? And I'm just gonna click up here and just go right along these, the sky here, okay? And you'll see that Photoshop's like, wait a second, you're selecting a lot of the same thing. I'm just gonna snap to, man. And it jumped all the way over here. So it's pretty smart. It knows the pixels that I'm trying to select. Now, if it selects too much of these trees here, I can press Alt or Option and then kind of come in here with Alt or Option selected on the outside of this magic selection tool. It really is magic. The smaller I make my brush, remember, the smaller selection it's going to make, Alt or Option, get really intricate in there, okay? Tomorrow I'm going to show you a much easier way to do this, but today, for now, I want you to do it the painstaking way. Why? Because it's really important that you understand how to do these things the easy way and the hard way. That's what mastery is all about. Mastery is not learning the easy stuff and then going with the easy stuff. Mastery is learning everything from the hard way to the easy way and back again. And press Alt or Option so I get rid of these trees here, and then Alt or Option and get rid of this up here too. Okay. Again, the smaller the brush, the better. So if I press Control and Spacebar, then right click, fit on screen, I'm going to press Control and Spacebar and zoom into this area right here. Again, Alt or Option to get rid of this selection here because I want a selection for the sky. Okay. That'll reduce this selection by pressing Alt or Option. Get these trees out of here. And for the most part, these don't have to be perfect. If you press the spacebar key while you're zoomed in, that'll just turn into a hand. You'll see the hand, and then you can click and you can move your image around. It just helps you move around the canvas when you're zoomed in. Let's go ahead and I'm going to call it good for now. Looks pretty good to me. Good enough for government work. Oh, Alt or Option. We'll click here and get rid of that. Okay. Okay. That looks good. So now I've made a selection for the sky. Okay. Once I have that sky selected, I can come down here to a curves adjustment layer or any adjustment layer for that matter. Let's just make it curves. And from here, I can modify what the sky looks like. You see, I can make the sky a little bit of a deeper blue sky. Look at that. Really nice. And then bump up. So even if the sky wasn't so great that morning, we can make it greater because we just separated the sky from the foreground. Okay, you see that? We can brighten it up in the mid-tone areas, darken it down in the darkest areas, and then we can essentially modify the lighter areas too here. Look at that. So just for the sky, we made that blue sky much more dramatic and much better feel, okay? Alt or Option, we can click on this and see. That's the exact selection that we made for that sky. Okay, we've just segregated the sky from the background. And why? And how does this work? Well, as we said in 2 lessons ago, and we're talking about masking, black conceals, white reveals. But what does it conceal and what does it reveal? Well, if we paint black on this layer, it's going to conceal this curves adjustment layer from affecting the rest of the image. And we know that because if we press and hold Shift on this mask, it's now going to make the whole image get that nasty curve on it, and it's not going to be good. Okay, that curve is great for the sky, but it's horrible for the foreground. So when we separate the two, we can edit them independently. The really cool thing about this is that as I'm making a selection here, we've already made this mask. And you're thinking, well, do I have to make that again if I wanted to do, let's say, a curve for the foreground? No, I can press the Control key. So if I press Control and then or Command and click on the mask, it's going to make a selection for anything in that layer. So anything in Photoshop that has a layer or a mask that can be selectable, if you press Command or Control and click on it in the layers palette, it will give you a selection for exactly that. So let's say I wanted the foreground now. How would I make that selection? Well, we could go to Select and go to Inverse, or we could press Control or Command, Shift, and I. And now we have a selection for the foreground. So if I were to make a curves adjustment layer here, watch what happens now. As I make this brighter to kind of match the brightness of everything that's going on back there, make it maybe a little bit brighter in those dark areas. Okay. And a little bit darker in the white areas. Look at that. Really nice. So we can even label these. We'll call this curve for sky. And call this curve for foreground. And then there's the foreground curve. There's the background curve. And remember, we aren't just stuck with the mask here. This curve for the foreground, it's making some really great things happen in the midtones, but not so much in the dark areas. So how do I fix that? Well, I can double click on this, and then I can say, protect the underlying layer's darkest areas from receiving this curve. We're combining masks and everything else that we've learned so far. Press OK. What would this look like if we used a different blend mode? Not very good, so we won't. Again, experiment. Drop the opacity here a little bit. And look at that. We brightened up that foreground while protecting the darkest dark areas, and then we made a curves adjustment layer for the sky that made the sky nice and bright and blue. Again, if it's too much though, drop that opacity and it's looking good. So selections in Photoshop are really powerful when they're used in conjunction with masks. Really simple ideas here. The most powerful selection tool you're going to be using, and probably the most common selection tool you're going to be using, is going to be the Quick Selection tool, which looked like the paintbrush with the little selection area around it. It really, as a photographer, that's probably what you're going to be using the most. But for the homework, I do want you to practice with all of them, because there are times in my photography that I use all the other selection tools, and if you don't know how to use them, then you're going to be lost. Okay, so experiment with them just to get a little bit of acquaintance with them. But just know that that Quick Selection tool is going to be probably the one that you use the most. The really important thing to understand here is that once you make a selection, if you make an adjustment layer, it's automatically going to add that selection to that adjustment layer's mask. If you make a selection and then you make a mask on a pixel layer, it's going to make a mask for that selection on that pixel layer. In the next lesson, I'm going to talk about a couple other things that are in Photoshop that make creating these selections a lot easier, especially with this one with the trees back there. Also going to talk about a trick that's going to help you remove a background like that. But practice with these selection tools first, and then we'll start talking about the easy ones.